Like it or not, Pauline Hanson will go down in Australia's history. She'll be a little bit like the Cronulla riots though, pretty culturally horrible, but memorable. Her hierarchy of needs really seems to be dominated by this desire to make Muslims feel unsafe in this country, and it's interesting to see this pro-white, anti-immigration, new conservative group rally behind One Nation, when by their own philosophy, One Nation also allows immigrants to take white people's jobs. It's undeniable that One Nation has had a huge surge in polling, but let's not lose perspective and understand that Albanese's Labour Party is still painting this country red like we're communist Russia, except we have a different problematic Lenin, and the only thing Albanese radically supports is the Rabbitohs and evicting people out of his Newtown home. That's obviously a joke. He's taken a step back on the Rabbitoh support, if you've noticed. With Barnaby Joyce leaving the Nationals and shacking up with Pauline over that horrific state dinner, it's going to be interesting to see the future of this new conservative Australian movement. My guess is it's going to fizzle away and lead to widening Labor's lead. But hey, who knows?
You get your act together, otherwise we're going to be the
Pauline Hanson and Barnaby Joyce are the new king and queen of this conservative Australian dynasty, really solidifying that relationship over that horrific steak dinner.
Political reporter Adam Langenberg joins us now. Adam, what was on the menu?
Gemma, Parliament House has pretty rudimentary dining facilities, but Senator Pauline Hanson gave it her best go. She cooked steaks on a sandwich.
Pauline Hanson, as you know and love or all hate her, is the leader of One Nation, famously drumming up division by wearing a burqa to Parliament not once but twice now, as well as trying to parachute her daughter into the Parliament and thankfully failing. Barnaby Joyce, on the other hand, is the ex-leader of the Nationals as well as part-time sidewalk reviewer.
I'm on a prescription drug, and they say certain things may happen to you if you drink, and they were absolutely 100% right. They did.
Despite both of these people giving up the worst "we saw you across the room and loved your energy" vibe, they are unfortunately some of the biggest names in the conservative movement at the moment, and they're creating a problem for this already hospice-ridden coalition. Barnaby isn't unpopular with coalition voters, with 39% of coalition voters saying they'd be more likely to vote for One Nation if he became the leader one day. The Liberals can't outflank One Nation on conservative issues, and Labour aggressively holds the middle to left of the political spectrum, really leaving the coalition without a home and creating this perfect environment for One Nation to start stealing from seats and growing their political power. It can't be understated how much One Nation is eating away at the coalition seats right now, with recent polling showing that if the election was going to be held this year, the coalition would lose about 14 seats, with One Nation gaining 12. The latest news poll even showed that currently, One Nation actually has a higher first preference vote than the Liberals. And sorry to be a buzzkill, but not to state the obvious, the election isn't being held today, and the Liberal and National coalition is not exactly where it would be if there was an actual election happening. January polling also sits in this weird twilight zone period anyway, where no one really knows or cares about what's actually going on. Whilst Letter Collector Lee is not currently successfully drumming up votes for the coalition, especially after the Nationals just abandoned the coalition, overly punishing some of the senators over how they voted on the recent hate speech bills, she is not going to be the leader for the next couple of months, let alone by the time an election rolls around. It is almost certainly going to be hasty if he decides to backstab her. Maybe it could be Angus Taylor, but it definitely isn't going to be her. Although if it ends up being hasty, he's not particularly liked by this new conservative online right at the moment over how he voted on the hate speech bill. When elections roll around, a single week can undo years of progress. And in my opinion, I think people are more comfortable voting for the devil they know rather than the devil they don't. And I think when it comes time for an election to happen, a lot of people are probably going to shift back over to the Liberals once they actually have something to vote for and know what the party stands for. And hey, maybe I'm going to be wrong. Maybe Barnaby has the charisma to galvanize the Australian people to vote for him. But as it currently stands, Barnaby Joyce is one of only 2 federal politicians who have a negative approval rating, sitting at a -4, only being beaten by Lydia Thorpe, who sits at a -12. Now, back in 2024, Barnaby had a negative approval rating of -22, so an 18-point improvement is nothing to scoff at, but let's wait and see how voters think about Barnaby when he's actually in front of the camera talking policy again. A lot of the reason people are so One Nation, Pauline, and Joyce coded at the moment is the issues that come from housing and immigration, as well as the division that comes after a horrific terrorist attack. One Nation has had huge surges in popularity before, but ultimately, they fade back into obscurity when people realize that the very loud bark they have does not represent a meaningful bite. Their policies are not particularly well thought out and really feel like they're more trying to signal how anti-woke they are rather than make life better for the average Australian. When you go on their website, one of their main policy platforms still there is their COVID-19 policy. It's been 6 years. Although across the world there has been this distancing from establishment parties, we don't have to look much further than the United States to see how horrific it was when they voted in a leader who made all these grandiose promises and how much the people regret it now. When Aussies are actually confronted with one nation solutions that go well beyond, we're going to stop you being invaded and make your life incredible, I think they're going to turn away from one nation pretty quickly. I think this chronically online belief that this Trump-style aggressive anti-woke political philosophy is coming to Australia is never going to actually happen. Dutton's campaign was borderline torpedoed by a single "Make Australia Great Again" comment, and I don't think the Australian public is going to be more receptive to Pauline Hanson doing it just because her favorite color is also orange. And you got to remember, at the end of the day, people aren't going to be voting for Pauline Hanson. They're going to be voting for a one-nation candidate who's meant to represent them locally and federally. And if United Australia Party was anything to go by, we're probably going to get some cookers who turn people off. One Nation is going to have to figure out how they actually want to talk to the Australian people and build their voter base, because for the average person, if you hear someone yelling slurs at minorities or talking about stopping all non-white immigration only, people reasonably start going, ooh, that feels a little bit weird and is probably a little bit racist. This new Australian conservative right wing that's been metastasizing on Twitter especially is not politically popular when it actually gets into the real world. And a lot of these voters are not going to accept One Nation taking a more moderate position. They're going to want one of that more extreme re-immigration or whites-only immigration, which is not going to be politically popular. And if One Nation doesn't do that, then these people will turn against them as well. And look, a lot of this extremist rhetoric is confined to online spaces. And after the government passed those new hate speech laws, it's going to be harder for these extremist groups to materialize in the real world. But One Nation is eventually going to have to come up with a solution to the fact that a lot of the voters promoting them right now, especially online, are a lot more radical. And with all of that said though, and I am absolutely inferring here, I don't have the stats and I couldn't find them, maybe some other people do, I think a lot of the support for One Nation, especially in online spaces, is really inflated. There are a significant amount of pro-Trump or pro-reform UK accounts that I am seeing in the comment sections of pro-One Nation Australia accounts. And those people, obviously, can't actually vote. We need to look no further than ex-NSN leaders Thomas Sewell's donation drive to contest these hate speech laws in the Supreme Court. There are a lot of Australians donating money, but there's also a lot of Canadians, Americans, people from the UK. And whilst it's normal for people to support other political parties in other countries that still meet their political philosophy, again, those people don't actually vote. I'm not saying it's this grand online psyop where there aren't genuine Australians who believe in these extremist immigration perspectives or re-immigration, or who are genuinely wanting Australia to be whites only. But I think it definitely is inflated. And that doesn't mean these people can't have a real world impact. I think they are, especially when it comes to some of the protests they're organizing. But I don't think this can be sustained. The biggest shift in voters is 55 plus rural Australians who never finish year 12. In fact, across all age demographics, the biggest group shifting to One Nation is people in rural areas who didn't finish year 12. And that's not to be interpreted as a dog comment or anything saying these people are stupid. It makes sense. People who've had less education, live in more rural areas, are likely to have worsening economic situations. They're likely to get hit harder by inflation, and they've probably seen some of their work or towns be heavily impacted by immigration, or companies choosing to offshore labor to immigrant workers or other companies. When parties like One Nation promise these people that they can fix their issues, that they can save them, it makes sense that they would believe what One Nation is saying about immigration issues or non-whites taking your jobs. It resonates with these people who are likely interacting with immigrants less on a daily basis, or might have greater difficulties with comprehension, so they're more susceptible to propaganda. These people are simply trying to get by. In my opinion, they're just being taken advantage of and lied to. And whilst these voters matter in the sense that they're not a small voting bloc, 44 and under now represents more than 1/3 of Australia's voters. And these people are not right-wing. Sure, there are some younger Aussies who are resonating with One Nation when they talk about the issues around housing or not being able to find a job, but 67% of 18 to 34-year-olds support Labor. And if we look at aggregate polling, not single polls, and look at how the country is broadly feeling, Labor is still in an incredibly strong position. And the Liberals aren't doing that horrifically either. Labor especially has only experienced a minor drop in first preferences since the election. And when you consider we just had a terrorist attack where there's a significant amount of division and Albanese was being aggressively blamed by a lot of conservative media, they're holding their voter base pretty strongly. I'm no statistician. I'm actually quite bad at maths. But from what I can see in the demographic information, One Nation probably isn't going to be able to sustain this rise. I think the ceiling is pretty low, and I'm not sure they're going to be able to make this happen for one election, let alone multiple. I think there's going to be a crash similar to what we've seen with the Greens before. I don't think One Nation is to be ignored, but I don't think they're going to be able to come the opposition party like a lot of people want them to be. There's also this question of how preference votes are going to flow, because there are a lot of Liberal voters who will still put Labor above One Nation. But look, I'll leave that to Cos and people who are a lot more educated on that matter than me. I don't think One Nation is a party to be ignored, but I don't think this orange wave is going to materialize like people say it's going to. But hey, maybe I'm wrong. We'll find out. The Liberals are in trouble, but it doesn't seem like Labor really is. But hey, come let me know what you think in the comments. Like and subscribe. It's been real.